Did you know that NASA is a government-funded agency that has several advisory committees and also oversight agencies that make sure that the agency is spending money appropriately? And this is despite some people within NASA complaining that it takes too much time to work on those audits. I want to talk to you about what those oversight committees are and what these advisory committees are, because you may not know just how much NASA is required to report to the public and what you can do to get involved. A meeting was held today by the NASA Advisory Council, a subcommittee called the Human Exploration and Operations Committee. The NASA Advisory Council is made up of distinguished members who are appointed by the NASA administrator or a designee. Their job is to report back to the NASA administrator to provide advice to NASA management. The members of the NASA Advisory Council are distinguished members, senior in their career, who can give fantastic advice to NASA and NASA's administrator, but only if they get the right level of information and they ask the deeper questions so that they can understand what's going on and tie in their expertise. And you might not know that you can dial into these meetings just like I did today. They are publicly open. You cannot talk during them except during public questioning, which is another thing people might not know, is that there's always some designated time for public comments, they call it. They don't call it questions. Actually, I don't think they're allowed to answer questions, but public comments. And usually that's completely silent. But today's committee focused on human exploration and operations. And I really wanted and expected this video to be about the really cool information that came from NASA's presentations today, but I found today's meeting somewhat lacking in details. Take, for example, this slide about Artemis, the Deputy Associate Administrator for the Moon to Mars program within NASA. He was going through every future Artemis mission, Artemis 2 through 5. The information that he presented was nothing that we already didn't know. Maybe we didn't already know that last bullet point, I'm not sure. I didn't know that the lunar cruiser, that's the pressurized lunar vehicle, the Japanese one that he referenced in this slide, I didn't know that was slated for Artemis 5, so maybe that is somewhat new information. But this is just an example. There's not a lot of details here. Even when he referenced future things like critical design reviews, he didn't really give dates. Two people in the meeting referenced the SpaceX Starship Flight 5. But neither one of them really gave any more information other than what's expected in the fall. We already knew that it was expected in probably September. Elon Musk said August, and not August probably, so probably September. To say it's coming in the fall, I mean, that just does not give you much information. That's most of the rest of the year. So that's just the example of the level of detail that they were giving. It's not always this way, by the way. I have been listening to these types of meetings for years, and usually there's a lot more back and forth. Usually there's a lot more digging into these details. Usually there's a lot more discussion about the problems and the delays. If you were listening to the NASA representatives speaking, you would think that the Artemis program is going perfectly well and that everything is going according to plan and according to schedule, which of course we know is not true. But the NASA representatives were not volunteering the information about what was going wrong, and the committee members were not asking it. Like the Orion heat shield issue, for example, it did not get mentioned at all until one of the committee members towards the end of the meeting brought it up. And all they did was say that they are analyzing the data. There are other advisory committees. There's not just the NASA Advisory Council. There's also the Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel, ASAP. That one is another public one that you can call into. And I'm less familiar with the Space Program Advisory Council and the Research Technology Advisory Council, but apparently those exist as well. What's unfortunate, though, is not all of them are recorded. So the meeting today, held by the NAC-EHO committee, that was not recorded. So all we have to go on in terms of transparency here are, seriously, people's tweets. I don't actually know if there's any other information out there other than the things that people were tweeting or posting on X, if you prefer. Now, we should get the minutes eventually, but if you look on their website, you can see that there's a lot of information lacking in terms of the minutes of previous meetings, as well as the findings and recommendations of previous meetings. Some of these advisory councils, they actually do get recorded, and you can watch them in video form after the fact. I want to talk about the oversight committees of NASA because that was a surprisingly large topic today. Of all the problems that are going on with human spaceflight within NASA, they chose to focus almost exclusively on the number of audits being done and the number of hours of NASA workforce that's dedicated to responding to these audit requests. The two oversight committees are the NASA Office of Inspector General and the Government Accountability Office. The offices of Inspector General are within federal agencies, so not just NASA, but the NASA Office of Inspector General is an independent organization. According to their website, We conduct objective oversight of NASA programs and operations and independently report to the administrator, Congress, and the public to further the agency's accomplishment of its mission. I recently did a video just 2 days ago on the NASA OIG report that came out about the Mobile Launcher 2 and how completely over budget, ridiculously over budget, and behind schedule it is. So you can link to that there. If you can guess how many times that report came up, 0. And in fact, when Bechtel and the ML2 program came up in the conversation, the NASA representative, he had glowing praise. He said absolutely nothing negative about that program. And I understand there's a difference between the company, the contractor, and the team. And so he was praising the team. But you would think that a report that just came out that talked about how badly that program is going would have gotten some kind of mention. But it did not. I actually did do a video recently on the problems that Boeing is having with the SLS Block 1B exploration upper stage. So if you want to watch that, that is right here. And if you can guess how many times that audit was brought up, that report was brought up, 0. The other audit agency I want to talk about is the Government Accountability Office. This is an independent, nonpartisan organization that reports directly to Congress. The NIC-HEO had previously recommended or submitted a finding, they couldn't remember, that they wanted to do less audits, that audits were taking up just too much time. They couldn't find record of that recommendation or finding, so they went ahead and submitted it for this meeting. And I just went like that when they were talking about this, because not only are these audits necessary, despite the time that they take, because this information is not getting out otherwise, but also they don't understand, or they didn't seem to understand on the call, that they could not advise the NASA administrator to do less audits because the NASA administrator has no control over the audits that are done. NASA OIG is independent of the NASA administrator, and GAO is independent of the NASA administrator. So this finding is going to go nowhere. One thing that came to mind when I was just even in the earliest stages of my NASA internships, I had several. My very first NASA internship, I remember it was drilled into my head that NASA is a U.S. taxpayer organization. It belongs to all the people of the United States. Every single person in the United States, every single citizen, every single taxpayer has a responsibility to keep NASA accountable of taxpayer dollars, as well as a right to know what's going on and a right to be proud of what NASA accomplishes. And in order for the public to know what's going on, NASA needs to release certain information, journalists need to be able to access certain information, and the public in Congress need these audits to understand where things might be going wrong. I am very proud of what NASA accomplishes. I want NASA to succeed beyond anybody's wildest dreams, but in order to do so, they need to be getting the best advice, they need to be on the right track, they need to be using their resources appropriately, and I'm only one voice. So if you are in the United States, you actually have a right to talk to members of Congress, not just your own elected representatives, but any members of Congress. So that is what I advise you to do, as well as paying attention to any public meetings that you are able to dial into or watch after the fact. If you are in the United States, NASA is your organization. So let's be proud of it and let's keep it on track.